True to his word, President Trump signed the executive order banning males from female sports.
In a few moments, I'll sign a historic executive order to ban men from competing in women's sports.
For the past 3 years, we have been stonewalled. And when I say we, I mean women. We have been stonewalled by the previous administration. And actually not just stonewalled, they actively worked against us as women and required these men into our sports, into our locker rooms, into our single-sex spaces, and reprimanded us as women if we even dared to question this.
May 19th, 2023, I was failed and called a transphobe for writing about men and women's sports. But today, February 5th, 2025, President Trump is signing an executive order to keep men out of women's sports.
So to see the moral clarity and the decisive action of course, President Trump, who has made this a priority. It was issue number 17 on his platform. Within the first, 2-3 weeks of his presidency, making this a priority, it sends a very strong, clear message to women and girls across the country that we matter. And again, that could not be more stark from the message that Joe Biden and his administration sent.
It blows my mind that we've even gotten to the point where we have to do this, but it's absolutely crucial. It's crucial if we want to protect the integrity of women's sports, but also allow opportunity for the generation of girls who come after me to participate safely and fairly in their sports, to allow for opportunity for those girls who may one day want to play in college, who may want to go to the Olympics one day.
What's up, everybody? Ty Rivera here, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world. Okay, so don't quote me because I'm terrible at counting, but I believe that yesterday was 17 days since President Trump has been in office for this second term, and he's already kept his word to women as far as helping to protect women's sports. And I'm going to play the most important clips of this for you just so you can see it, because I don't know why, but CNN didn't choose to air it. I ended up finding it on YouTube, on Forbes. So I'll end up playing those clips for you so you can see for yourself how it went down and what exactly you said.
And this doesn't have to be long. It's just all about common sense. Doesn't have to be long. In a few moments, I'll sign a historic executive order to ban men from competing in women's sports. It's about time. Under the Trump administration, we will defend the proud tradition of female athletes, and we will not allow men to beat up, injure, and cheat our women and our girls.
Okay, I'm not pausing for any other reason than that is something that was really happening, was women were getting injured. Like the most notable example was Peyton McNabb, who got hurt during the volleyball game, which he ends up shouting her out as well.
And also with us is another great champion for women, Peyton McNabb. In high school, Peyton was a rock star athlete. Where is Peyton? Where is Peyton? I like Peyton. Nice to see you. Good job. Good job. Looks like a good athlete to me. In high school, Peyton was a rock star athlete preparing for a future in college sports, but in one volleyball match, a much taller and stronger male spiked the ball right in her face, knocking her unconscious, partially paralyzing her right side and leaving her with a traumatic brain injury. And Peyton said it was 100% avoidable if only my rights as a female athlete had been more important than a man's feelings. And we can't let it happen, and it's not going to happen.
And that's a very strong statement to make right there, and very true. If only my rights as a female athlete had been more important than a man's feelings, I don't know anybody that could hear that and not be like, she makes a good point. It really was her physical safety that was put on the line and ended up suffering because you aren't allowed to tell a male that they're a male and they shouldn't be competing with females. And when you have situations like that where somebody gets spiked and they end up dealing with paralysis on the right side of their body and a brain injury, and it basically ends any hopes they had of moving forward in that particular sport, like say in college, you really do get an idea of how this has real world consequences. And it's not just about trying to exclude trans people from fun, as much as trans activists will try to make it sound like that, and where it's like, we're just trying to exclude people. people. Well, it's not just about trying to exclude people. It's the fact that females are actually getting hurt in your experiment. And exactly how many do you think are supposed to get hurt or lose any chance of moving forward in possibly having a career in a particular sport for it to actually matter? Because if your logic is that it's not a big enough number for it to really matter, then I would go back to what the trans population is compared to the United States population in general. And then I would say, if we're going by that logic, trans issues shouldn't matter altogether. Do you see the way that works? If a small number doesn't matter, then a small number doesn't matter.
From now on, women's sports will be only for women.
And I'm surprised it was able to get to this level. Like the clips that I just played would indicate, it really has been crazy world. And I've mentioned before that because I've had trans friends for my entire adult life now, I would have been the strongest supporter back maybe 12 years ago before all the madness really started and everybody started trying to push the trans women are women thing. I would have been a huge supporter of trans rights in general, and I wouldn't have been able to see myself getting to this point. But when it comes down to it, all of my trans friends are super chill about it and understand that they are genetically male, and so there is a difference between them and females. And then also, I have a mother, I have sisters, I have nieces, I have female friends, and so I can definitely see how a lot of these things were unfair to women, and that's why I eventually spoke out.
So in recent years, the radical left has waged an all-out campaign to erase the very concept of biological sex and replace it with a militant transgender ideology.
And he did use the right word there, because it is militant. When there are actual consequences to you just speaking, that is militant. When people show up to shout groups down because they don't agree with people talking about biological reality, that is militant. So I don't want to hear any trans people saying they paint us as militant. No, you come off as militant. You behave in a militant manner. And these stories about trans women in female sports really had gotten to a point where I would cover them, and then some I just chose not to cover because it got so repetitive, where it's like, how many times can you say the exact same thing and have people not get it? Because I really do feel that it's a bad faith argument from trans activists when they try to say that there's no difference between a male and a female, because in order to transition, you have to take the hormones of the opposite sex.
Men claiming to be girls have stolen more than 3,500 victories, that's a lot, and invaded more than 11,000 competitions designed for women.
Now, this goes back to where the trans activists are constantly saying that there aren't enough trans athletes for this to really be a problem. So if 3,500 victories were stolen from women and 11,000 competitions invaded that were meant to be for women, how is this happening? Is it the same trans person over and over and over that's just showing up to all these different events and making up for 3,500 stolen victories and showing up to 11,000 different events? Is that what's happening here? And I know that there's some repetition, but it's not to the point where it makes up for 3,500 or 11,000. So can we stop gaslighting, please, trans activists?
Last year, a male cyclist posing as a woman competed in the 800-mile Arizona Trail Race, a very big deal in cycling, and obliterated the women's course record by nearly 5.5 hours. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it, huh? 5.5 hours, but you have to hear the weightlifting records.
Now there's Donald Trump just being fun. I really like it that he's willing to have fun about a lot of this stuff, even though he's him. But it is just ridiculous and laughable that he has to bring up the weightlifting. And I like I said, that he will use levity at points, but it's a very serious thing. And sometimes people forget that there are people that compete in things, and yeah, maybe they're not even trying to be at a professional level in any way. They're just doing something for the fun of it, but they still like like to know what their standings are. And I had a friend that had this happen, and she is not anything close to transphobic. Actually, she knows all of my trans friends, always been super cool, is a mother, doesn't have time to think about transphobia, doesn't have time to be transphobic. But at a point, she started running marathons, and they had this local ranking system where it would be the men's and the women's, and obviously she's in the women's, but there was a genetic male, a trans woman, that was also part of the women's, and that person was second place in the rankings, which means everybody else moves down. And it really used to bother this woman, even though she wouldn't like say anything that was what you could call transphobic. She was just very matter of fact. Like one time she told me, she was like, yeah, I'm number this. I can't remember what her number was, but she was like, I'm number this, and that person's number 2. And it bothers me because they're just not a woman. And I think all of this has trickled down and made it so a lot of everyday people that wouldn't otherwise have a problem with trans people moving throughout the world however they wanted to move throughout the world, but because of things like this, it made it so they were like, okay, well, maybe this is a problem. So this whole thing about trans in sports and really pushing trans women to be the same as regular women has really done more bad than it's done good for the trans community, and the activists just can't see that. So I wish that they would pull it together and understand, but I'm not at all hopeful for it.
You think that's bad? The weightlifting's worse. In 2023, a man in women's powerlifting broke 2 world records and outlifted his closest female opponent in one event by 440 pounds.
440 pounds, but there's no difference between men and women. And I really don't know how we got to a point where any of this was even considered controversial. To me, it all just seems common sense and logic, which is something Donald Trump said during his speech.
I mean, it really is. It's common sense more than anything else.
The whole ceremony took about 35 minutes. Obviously, we're not going to go through the whole 35 minutes. A fair amount of it was him thanking the different people that were involved, the different legislators that helped to shine the spotlight on the fact that this was going on and the injustices happening to women. And another thing that gets me is the trans community still is trying to push the trans women are women.
And they continue to defend themselves, Mr. Congressman. You know that, right? They continue to defend themselves. We hope they continue onward because I don't think we can lose a race. This was one of the big reasons that we all won, and it's one of the big reasons that we had a record, a landslide like they haven't seen before. Very often, anyway. And who could forget last year's Paris Olympics, where a male boxer stole the women's gold medal after brutalizing his female opponent so viciously that she had to forfeit just after 46 seconds, and she was a championship fighter. And actually, they had 2 women or 2 people that transitioned, and both of them won gold medals, and they won them very convincingly. But all of that ends today because with this executive order, the war on women's sports is over.
Even though everything's falling apart around them.
With my action this afternoon, we're putting every school receiving taxpayer dollars on notice that if you let men take over women's sports teams or invade your locker rooms, you will be investigated for violations of Title IX and risk your federal funding. There will be no federal funding. So this will effectively end the attack on female athletes at public K-12 schools and virtually all U.S. colleges and universities. I don't think we've missed anything, but if we do, we'll make it up very quickly with an order.
And reality is just telling them, hey, not only is that not true, you're not going to be able to convince us that that is true. So if you're smart, you'll pivot, or you'll start to look at things in a more logical way for yourself and start being honest with yourselves. The old tactics aren't going to work anymore because we're not going to go for them. And not only are we not going to go for them, we're not going to allow them. Like when it came to Riley Gaines and the woman that was speaking at the beginning of this video, and many others, many that we'll never even hear about because they didn't make the news. And I don't think it's because right-wing media is trying to avoid it. I think it would just be constantly the same stories over and over, so they just have to go for the ones that will make the biggest impression and make the point, because if not, it would just be over and over. Like at a point I covered when these 8th grade girls had a situation, and that didn't get covered by the mainstream. I don't even remember where I found that. I made sure that I did my research, that it was an actual story and it was actually going down. But nobody has talked about that as far as the mainstream goes. Then just not too long ago, I did the video where it was like a high school in Idaho and a trans student was using the women's locker room and getting fully undressed. And some of the girls at the school were saying they were creeped out. I still haven't seen that in the mainstream. So when people would try to point to that and be like, well, why aren't we hearing about more of these? And why didn't we? It's like, because nobody has time to cover all of them. And like I said, how many times can you say the same thing over and over? And at what point do you start to go crazy? Because there have been points where I feel like I'm going a little bit crazy because I feel like I just said this a week ago, or I just said this 2 weeks ago. And I don't know why. There will be trans people sometimes in the comments, or you'll see them on X, and they're trying to argue the same points that science and biology has already proven to be true. The structure of a male is different from that of a female. That's what it is. How many ways can we say that? And they were very effective in the way that they were able to silence female students and women in general by either getting them fired from their job, having them get suspended from school, getting them banned from social media or suspended on social media. These were all very effective ways of making sure that these people's stories didn't get out, and also making sure that they got punished to a point where they didn't necessarily want to speak out. Because at some point, even if you're right, you do just get like, okay, maybe this just isn't worth it. Maybe I am ruining my life. I'm sure Riley Gaines, the swimmer that called out Leah Thompson, went through that at different points, which she was there for the ceremony, obviously, and Trump shouted her out.
We're honored to be joined today by many incredible advocates for women's sports, including the brave swimmer at the forefront of this battle. And Riley Gaines is a person that I've been watching. Yeah.
But I'm sure there were points where she was like, is this really worth it? Am I just wasting my life and my potential? And so the point I'm trying to make is I don't know how we got to a point where you were able to shame people, or it wasn't allowed to acknowledge the difference between the sexes, and how that suddenly became a phobia or some sort of hate. Like, to me, it's as simple as this desk I'm at is a desk. It's not a dinner table. So if I say that this is a desk and I'm clear about the fact that it's not a dinner table, I don't think it should be considered a phobia to say that this isn't a dinner table. I don't hate dinner tables. I'm just not currently sitting at a dinner table. And I feel the same way when it comes to sex and gender. I am talking to a man or a woman. I am talking to a male or a female. We are watching a male or a female compete. There are male and female categories. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing hateful about it. Nobody's trying to say that trans people can't exist. Trans people still can be in sports. Trans women can compete against males, and it'll be as fair as it can possibly be. Oh, what? Once you start taking the estrogen, there's a difference between the way you performed before you were on the estrogen? Well, that would lead me to believe that there's probably differences between males and females. I hope I'm not considered transphobic for that. Anyway.
But the actions we're taking today are the latest in a sweeping effort to reclaim our culture and our laws from the radical left crusade against biological reality. On day one, I made it official, and I'm making it official policy of the United States government that there is, two genders. We have two genders. What might they be? Man and woman, right? Male and female. Male and female. Can't think of too many others.
And again, I'm not just interrupting to interrupt. Right now, he goes into talking about the way that he was instrumental in facilitating the Olympics being in LA coming up in 2028. But while we have a quick break, because he does have a bit to say about the Olympics and the way that that's going to play out when it comes to the women's events, because everybody remembers Amani Khalif was the female boxer that was just obliterating everybody and turned out to be intersex, but intersex on the male side. And they still haven't fully addressed that, even though that's pretty well been exposed as just being what it is. But there's been no real statement, as far as I know, and the Olympic Committee's coming out and saying anything. But as far as what he said, when it comes to the Democrats just not wanting to accept that we are not having this new version of reality, and that's probably going to cost them elections forever until they get it together. And I think he is 100% right on that. And I don't say that just because I'm a Trump supporter. I don't say that just because of my own personal thinking. Technically, I say that as a person that voted Democrat when I was younger, and as a person that sees that a lot of the things that they claim to stand for should be things that I would be in line with because they would benefit me, but also being a truly logical person and seeing that a lot of what they're espousing isn't helpful to the people that they claim to want to help, I know for a fact that they will not have a win for a very long time if they continue to fight not only biological reality, but reality in general and common sense.
But Marco is going to make clear to the International Olympic Committees there, and he's going to make it as clear as anybody can make it, that America categorically rejects transgender lunacy. We want them to change everything having to do with the Olympics and having to do with this absolutely ridiculous subject that we even have to talk about this subject. If you went back 10 years or 15 years and you would move forward and listen to this, you'd say, what the hell are they talking about? This is impossible. But you have people out there, Democrats, that are still totally in favor. They can't win the argument. They can't win a debate. They look like fools, and they continue to go on.
And that's what I was referring to. When you feel like you're beating your head against a wall while repeating the same information to people that they know is true as well, but they're pretending to be able to debate you on it. And it's like, it's just a fact that there are differences between males and females. I'm not trying to hoodwink you in any way. This is what it is. Can we please stop playing with each other now? And then you'll have trans people like, well, have they done a peer-reviewed study? Shut up. You want a peer-reviewed study? Here you go. You claim to be a female. You're a born male. Correct? Good. Got it. Pull down your pants. Bring in an actual female. Have her do the same. Fully consensual, of course. Then invite a couple of your friends over. Let them observe the differences. And unless they're blind, your peers will be able to confirm that there are differences between male and female.
In Los Angeles in 2028, my administration will not stand by and watch men beat and batter female athletes, and we're just not going to let it happen, and it's going to end, and it's ending right now, and nobody's going to be able to do a damn thing about it, because when I speak, we speak with authority.
Yeah, and I'll also say that not only does Trump speak with authority, but being that this time around he has the majority of us on his side, he's going to be pretty unstoppable. And that's the reason he's been able to get so much done this time around in the first couple of weeks, is because if you remember in 2016, a lot of people were buying into this. He's the most evil thing in the world, so we've got to stop him. He's got to be stopped. And so people just kept throwing obstacles in the way. And it really did make it so he wasn't able to be as effective as we would have wanted him to be. But now that the Democrats have messed up so much, and a lot of people have started to see that maybe we should try it a different way, that's the reason he's been able to be so effective in these first couple of weeks, is because he doesn't have people constantly losing it in the streets. People are like, well, let's see what happens. Even the people that hate him, you're starting to see this, or I should say hated him, he's kind of winning them over, and they are getting at least like, okay, I'm not going to completely lose it over this. Let me be just a little bit level-headed and give it a wait and see. And then at the very least, some people are like, just let these people have the consequences that they're going to have once they get what they want from this president. And I'll take it. Any thinking you have that makes you decide to stay out of our way and let our president do what it is we need him to get done, even if you think it's going to blow up in our faces, I just appreciate you staying out of the way. I really mean that too. I'm not being sarcastic at all. I really appreciate you, for whatever reason, just deciding to kick back and let it happen the way that it needs to happen. And if you're right and it blows up in our faces, which I really don't think it will, but if you're right and it does, then we'll have learned the lesson. And I know some people are going to be like, well, what kind of damage is it going to do to the country? I'm sure not any more that Weekend at Biden's did.
And for the same reason, just to make sure, I'm also directing our Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, who's also she's out there with you, Greg, a fantastic job. She's unbelievable. I was watching her riding yesterday on a horse. She was as good as anybody. She's very good. To deny any and all visa applications made by men attempting to fraudulently enter the United States while identifying themselves as women athletes, try and get into the games, maybe where they are unable to get into the games.
He's not playing. He's not playing at all. Not on his watch. You ain't going to sneak in pretending to be a woman.
And it's okay, because as long as they do this and open borders and all of the other things they talk about, transgender, everything, all they want to do is transgender and men playing in women's sports and all of these crazy things. And if they continue, I think we're going to end up ultimately, it's not going to matter because we're never going to go along with them and we're just going to keep winning elections, right, Mike?
And he's not wrong. Everything had been overtaken by woke ideology. It really just had gotten out of hand. And so now here we are, and I don't really want to hear anybody complaining about it because this is where you put yourselves. Don't blame the rest of us for something that you kind of had in the palm of your hand for a minute there, and it was yours to mess up, and you messed it up.
But it's pretty amazing. I rescinded federal funds and this is so important, to any program that promotes transgender ideology using taxpayer dollars. We're not going to do it. We're not going to do it.
Now, this is the only thing that I was kind of worried about, and that's just because I don't know if trans people getting their hormones from certain organizations, like in Las Vegas, the LGBT Center has a pharmacy that distributes the hormones to trans men and women, which are full-grown adults, or were the last time I was around that program or saw that program in action. So it wasn't geared towards minors. And then here in Austin, I know the Kind Clinic also will distribute hormones, and these are through some sort of program where it is free to the actual patient or at a huge discount. And I know that's partly because of federal funding. So I don't know if that's going to be considered to be part of gender ideology. I hope not. But at the same time, because I know some people will hit me up and be like, well, how can you say you stand behind trans people and then hear things like this are happening and still go with them? And because I think the general public is more important, just to be 100% honest and 100% real with you. I think women's safety is more important. So if the trans activists pushed it to a point where, in order to completely make it so that this didn't happen anymore, that couldn't happen anymore either, so that the lines didn't get blurred, again, I wouldn't be blaming me on it, because if I had my way, trans women would have stayed out of female sports. The programs that allow for genuine transsexuals that suffer from gender dysphoria to get their hormones, that would be an option too still. So in my world, both were possible, but it seems like since you weren't able to leave the sports alone, now this is in danger too. And again, I'm not taking the blame for your bad decisions. How about maybe I thought the compromise was they left you alone to do what you needed to do as an adult and get your hormones, and you left minors as well as female sports alone. Maybe I thought that's what the compromise could have been.
At some point, we have to hope they do come around, because we can never let this happen again. What's happened to our country, we can never let this happen again.
And I agree with President Trump there too. Hopefully they do come around and understand that it's gotten out of control, because rather than just winning elections, I would like to see more people just move closer towards sanity, towards understanding that compromise can be a thing, towards understanding that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing where it's all the trans way or it's all the more traditional way. Like, there can be compromise in this country, and it is going to be necessary. But when one side is refusing to compromise and wants to throw out all these ridiculous claims and stipulations, of course, the other side is going to have to be just as firm. Decide how far you want it to go, liberals, because being that we're the majority and more people are coming over to our way of thinking because we're just talking about logic and common sense, decide if you want to stay on that losing team. And you have bad leadership if they can't see that they need to compromise. So that should help you make the decision right there.
We're defending the rights and safety and pride of the American people, including our great female athletes.
Oh, and while he's on the subject of the great female athletes, I know a lot of people on the left say that none of us would be paying attention to women's sports if it wasn't for this particular issue. And you're 100% right. I wouldn't be paying attention to sports, period. I don't pay attention to male sports. But the reason that we're paying attention to female sports, there are some people that are genuinely into female sports. There are women that have been athletes in the past or were athletes when they were younger and they still have an interest in women's sports. There definitely is their audience, but as far as the people that you're referring to that would be more like me, that wouldn't be paying attention otherwise, you're right. We wouldn't be paying attention otherwise because maybe that's just not our interest. But when we see that people are being wronged and when we see that our numbers are needed, yeah, we will step up. And for me, this isn't so much about the sports. This is about women. That's what nobody understands when they're saying that. It's like, you're right. We're not worried about the sports. Like I said, with me in particular and with a lot of us, we're not into sports, period. I don't watch men's sports. So it's not like you can say, well, he watches football every day. Look at me. I'm not watching football. I'm not watching basketball. I'm not watching baseball. Sometimes UFC, but not for the reasons that you would watch it. Let's not get into that though. Not that kind of video. But I definitely am not usually watching sports. But when I saw that women were being wronged time and time again, and being that I have a platform, I was like, let me throw my voice at this so that even more people understand the logic in what these women are asking and the lack of logic in what these people are demanding. So you're right. Some of us are only interested because of this.
I'm going to sign the executive order right now, and everything I said will go into effect immediately, okay?
Okay, so he goes over to sign the executive order, and I gotta admit, it kind of made my heart warm seeing all the little girls gather around him. There were people that were saying that there were no people of color in that picture, but if you look, this little girl right here appears to be biracial. Not sure exactly what her mix is, but obviously biracial. And then this little girl over here looks to be either possibly Asian or some sort of Latina, or who knows exactly, but they're people of color, and people will make it seem like it was racist or it was Trump's decision to only have white kids. And I don't think that that's it at all. I think that really what happens is that most people of color know that they're going to be shamed and going to be canceled, or there's at least going to be a cancel attempt on their career or whatever they have going professionally or socially. So they're less likely to show up to an event like this because they don't want to deal with the headache of it, even if they do believe. Because if you didn't know, Black people get called names for supporting Trump, which I don't have to tell you the names. You've heard them. You've seen them. When it comes to Latinos, we get a lot of heat for voting for Trump too. There's people like me that don't care either way and will just say what I have to say and stand by what I want to stand by. But I also don't have a regular job, so it's not like I have to worry about getting fired. And also, all of my friends know since 2015 that I've been supporting Donald Trump. So anybody that's fallen off as far as socially fell off years ago and knows that I don't care what their opinions are as far as the way I vote, just like I don't concern myself with the way my friends vote. That's not something that we argue about or fight about or even really talk about unless it's just in a very conversational and pleasant way. But we don't have those kinds of situations in my friend groups. Even, like I said, I have friends that are definitely left-leaning. I wouldn't say far left, but definitely left-leaning. And they'll ask me questions about how I support certain things or why I support certain things. And then some of them watch my videos and they know from that. But either way, when they feel that there's a conversation that needs to happen, we have that conversation as pleasant. And then when we're done with it, whether we agree or disagree, we go back to being friends. And that's the way my world works. But I know not everybody has that luxury. So when you shame people out of being somewhere and then you complain about the fact that there's a lack of representation of those people at particular events, events, maybe you're the reason that there's a lack of representation of those people at those events. But what I was saying is, it did warm my heart to see those little girls gather around Trump, and you really got like a grandpa vibe from him, which is something I've seen Donald Trump grow into because I'm Gen X. And so when I was a young kid, Donald Trump was a thing and people knew about The Art of the Deal, and he made a cameo on Home Alone 2, which wasn't when I was a kid, but obviously, like, what was I? Probably teenager? Yeah, probably teenager when Home Alone came out and Home Alone 2. And so I remember Donald Trump when he was the swinger, when he really was making his name as like the celebrity Donald Trump. And then seeing him grow into this old man is what he is, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. Actually, I think it's a great thing. At what point is somebody allowed to just be old? You know, and I really do feel like for whatever mistakes he's made in the past, and I'm a human being and I have eyes, so I'm not ever trying to pretend like the president is perfect, but I'm not perfect. And I thought the president was supposed to represent the people, and I don't know any perfect people. So being that we're dealing with an imperfect man and we're an imperfect society full of imperfect people, I feel like it makes him the perfect president for some of us. And so there's that too. But notwithstanding, what I was trying to get at is it does warm my heart to see him surrounded by a bunch of young girls that, whether or not they realize exactly what's going on right now, this executive order could really help them in the future. Because while we have to remember that this is an executive order, so the next president could come in and wipe it out, if one of these legislators really is down for it, say like a Nancy Mace, and is willing to propose a law that basically covers all of this, then that would be super helpful in the long run, because who knows, like in the future, if we have a Democrat president, they're able to just strike that down. You know, so it would probably be very helpful if one of these legislators would actually write up a law and see what we can do to protect women's sports in a more permanent way. But what I'm getting at is these young girls will benefit from what's happening. And even if this were to get struck down at some point, they'll still benefit from the fact that President Trump went ahead and put his foot down when it came to trans ideology and protecting not only women's sports, but a lot that he's done to protect women so far. So that's where I'm at on it. Let me know down below in the comments how you feel about it. If you want to see a video of me talking about the anti-ICE protests that happened over the weekend, click the link on your screen. Other than that, as always, thank you for watching. This has been Ty Rivera, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world.
They bought into his bullshit.